In 1960 in America, a new house cost about $12,000. The average car cost about $3,000, and a gallon of gas, only 25 cents. See, life was pretty easy. Well, for some people.
I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
This was the national landscape in which the METCO program was birthed, a nation ripe with racism, full of misguided intention, and ready to burst. In the early 60s, Boston parents were becoming increasingly frustrated with inadequate educational facilities in comparison to their white counterparts across the city. The environment in the city at that time was defined by the ugliness that surrounded Boston's busing controversy, echoes of which still linger today.
What happens in the 1960s is first, parents are upset with the quality of education their children are receiving. And schools are old. In some cases, the schools were built before the Civil War. They're inadequate. Certain parts of the city are growing, particularly the black community. The black population in Boston is really expanding in the 50s, early 60s. So these neighborhoods are really growing. They see their kids are in really crowded schools, inadequate textbooks, and so on. And so they see this as part of a broader problem in the society.
The schools in the black community, because we were segregated, you would think you were in different countries. There was a man who gave money to the school system so every teacher could buy books. We never saw them in the black community.
In the best of times, the Boston School Department as a bureaucracy is slightly less open than the Kremlin. You know, it's really inflexible. You can't find anything out. So anyone dealing with the school department is going to have frustration. So the school committee isn't going to do anything. The legislature steps in and passes the Racial Imbalance Act.
The Racial Imbalance Act of 1965 is the legislation passed by the Massachusetts General Court, which made the segregation of public schools illegal in Massachusetts. These racially imbalanced schools were required to desegregate according to the law or risk losing their state educational funding.
The only two communities in the Commonwealth to which this would apply, that is where there could be schools racially imbalanced, are Springfield and Boston. And the delegations from both Springfield and Boston are opposed to the Racial Imbalance Act because it seems to be targeting them.
If the implementation of the racial imbalance law is allowed to happen in the city of Boston, then we should be on the streets marching to save our city. Save our city from the implementation of a law that will have a tremendous impact on the quality of life in the city, on its housing, on its job opportunities and employment, on its tax rate, and on also the exodus from the city of the middle-class white people who will not put quality education secondary to the racial balancing of the schools.
This is Fairmount Avenue in Hyde Park, where no fewer than 14 homes are currently for sale, and each was listed within the past month. In fact, in the weeks since the Boston School Committee more or less finalized its intended acquiescence to the state's racial imbalance law, there are some parts of the city that have become nearly frantic.
Frustrated by systematic protests, rallies, and direct confrontations with Boston's all-white school committee, a group of black Boston parents were inspired to begin the Operation Exodus program.
Exodus, which is a takeoff from the Bible, the Christian Bible, was moving out of your neighborhood and driving around to schools with parents and citizens who were interested in education and finding out where the empty seats were.
In September of 1964, Operation Exodus bused children from Roxbury to schools throughout the city of Boston that had better conditions and facilities. These schools were often predominantly white. Parents were able to do this under Boston's open enrollment policy.
You, as a parent or a child, could find another school if there is an open seat. And so some parents in the Grove Hall neighborhood in Roxbury, this is the African American community, looking at the school system and understanding that they can send their child to another school, start contacting other schools. Operation Exodus really starts in the mid-60s as a way of getting our kids out of overcrowded schools in this here and sending them to a school where there are open seats and actually where the instruction might be better.
I had a chance to see the differences between the schools in Roxbury and Dorchester and those out in Brighton and say Jamaica Plain and different parts of the city. Quite different.
It takes on a racial cast because if you're a parent in Roxbury or in Dorchester, this is what you see. Boy, how come the schools here are overcrowded, schools on Beacon Hill aren't? These are the two neighborhoods which are very different. To be fair, schools in South Boston are also overcrowded. In fact, they have trailers as annexes in some of the schools in South Boston. That is, some neighborhoods have a big school-age population and some don't. So this is really what's behind Operation Exodus, which is the precursor to the METCO program. It is a parent-led grassroots movement.
At its peak, Operation Exodus served 976 students. However, it ended 5 years later due to a lack of funding. Yet in its existence, the program played a key role in shaping public opinion about school desegregation and publicizing the failures of Boston's unwillingness to integrate its public schools. Amid the backdrop of the civil rights movement, Boston parents were not the only ones who had concerns for their children's future. While residents in Boston were fueled by a desire for their children to have better educational opportunities, some families in the suburbs began to see the need for their children to integrate with children of color.
The Racial Imbalance Act also has a provision for having children from these schools go to schools outside the district in towns that will be receptive to them. So this is really the beginning of METCO. So there's a problem in Boston with the imbalance of schools, and then there's the outside of Boston, there are fewer people of color. And some of these towns, in the wake of the Racial Imbalance Act, the Civil Rights Act, recognized the racial disparities in the country, and here you have parents who really are motivated about having their kids get a better education. So do open their schools up to students from Roxbury, Dorchester, students of color.
In fact, in 1964, the Brookline Civil Rights Committee asked the Brookline School Committee to accept Boston Black children. And as Operation Exodus came to an end, the grassroots initiative birthed a new program, METCO. Initially, METCO included the towns of Brookline, Lexington, Newton, Wellesley, Braintree, Arlington, and Lincoln. However, soon after, other communities began to follow suit. In 1966, Needham formed a racial imbalance committee in response to the racial imbalance in Needham Public Schools. The report was done at a time when across Needham Public Schools, there were only 30 non-white children, among about 7,000 students. The findings of the report suggested that Needham seek a way to integrate students of color into their community and permit Needham schools to act as an ever stronger force for national unity by making it natural for Needham children to regard and evaluate children of other races as individuals, without regard to characteristics irrelevant to individuals' worth.
The METCO program was born out of a desegregation program, and in fact it still is considered by state law a desegregation program.
METCO is still relevant today because segregation still exists. Our towns are more segregated today than they were when the actual METCO program started. You have all these pockets of communities that are very isolated and they don't really interact with one another. So as long as everybody in your school system looks pretty much like you, the METCO program is needed.
The opportunity to bring communities together, the METCO program is one of those opportunities to do that.
When people are educated in the same classroom, they break down their own stereotypes of one another and then give each other an opportunity. And that is what the METCO program does. It builds friendships and it actually breaks down racial barriers.
METCO, or the Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity, is a voluntary integration program that provides a suburban public school education for minority students from Boston and Springfield. METCO is the longest continuously running voluntary school desegregation program in the country. And according to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the program is intended to expand educational opportunities, increase diversity, and reduce racial isolation by permitting students in certain cities to attend public schools in other communities that have agreed to participate. The Needham METCO program began in the mid-60s. Reverend Robert Gray was a member of its founding class and graduated Needham High School in 1970.
When I found out where I was going, my thing was, okay, let's see how this works. I wasn't thinking in terms of going into an all-white community, and that was probably a little beyond my maturity level at that point. I knew I was going to go to school here. When I got out here, I realized that there was 9 of us and 2,000 other people in the high school. And I said, whoa, this is a little different.
The Needham METCO program has a staff consisting of about 6 people. Dr. Joanne Allen Willoughby became the director of Needham Public Schools' METCO program in 2009 and is a former graduate of Needham Public Schools.
One of the things that really interested me about this position was because it was in Needham. My career really had been in higher ed. And when I decided to shift to more secondary education, and realized that there was a position open in Needham where I grew up, it was important to me to come back.
Shakur Abdahalik is the coordinator of the high school METCO program. He meets regularly with teachers, students, and guidance counselors to promote the academic and social progress of METCO students in grades 9 through 12. Leslie Smart is the coordinator of the METCO program for middle school students. She also helps to train teachers across the district in cultural proficiency. Tamara Peoples is the coordinator of the METCO program for the elementary schools and is a former METCO graduate from Weston High School. In addition, Needham METCO students are supported throughout the school year by 2 METCO teaching assistants.
Really, in Needham, the METCO program has sustained itself and it has thrived because I think this community, as I reflect on it, has really tried to embrace the ideals of different kids coming together to learn from one another.
To enroll a child in the METCO program, application must be made in person at METCO's main office in Boston, and students are placed on a waiting list until he or she is selected for placement. According to the Massachusetts Department of Secondary and Elementary Education, placement decisions are based on several things: completion of the METCO application packet, submission of all school records, date of registration, district grade and seat availability, presence of siblings on the waiting list, and race. In fact, in the past 10 years, increased efforts have been made to have the METCO program better reflect the diversity of Boston Public Schools.
The program looks different, and so when people have these conceptions about METCO, they think of METCO from when it first started. And as I said, it was a predominantly sort of African-American driven program. We also have students that are Latino, so it's not even always Afro. The qualification for METCO is that a student lives in the city of Boston and that they are of a racial minority.
Students that enroll in this program, the majority of them enroll in, their parents are committed to this. Their parents are willing to work hard to make sure that their children get there, to work with them and ensure that they do as well as they possibly can in the district.
There's a certain level of trust that parents have to have with a district, with METCO staff, with educators, to put your 5-year-old on a school bus in the morning to leave their community to go be educated by folks that they're going to get to know, but maybe not folks that are their neighbors that would have been at their neighborhood school. There is an extreme amount of trust that families are putting in the district to do right by their students.
About 90% of METCO students go on to post-secondary education. Once again, this is above the statewide average and far higher than the corresponding rates for Boston and Springfield. A waiting list of about 10,000 students translates into a 2 to 5 year wait to get into the program, allowing the program to place no more than 350 to 400 new students each year.
I was born in the middle of a snowstorm in January. Prior to myself having been named, my aunt was dispatched to the METCO office to make sure that I was on the list so that by the time I was age 5 or so, I could be eligible to be in a program. I mean, literally all she could write down was infant female last name Peoples, but my name was on an application.
100% true. I mean, most people come right out of the hospital, and that's what historically what people have been told in order to be able to make it and have a good chance of being accepted. I myself followed that same I myself followed that same path. So I came right out of Brigham and Women's Hospital, and before I went to my house, I came here. Because I knew that it was about a 5-year wait list. So if I started now, by the time my daughters would be in kindergarten, I would have a good chance of having waited long enough to be into the program.
So my older son, I actually signed him up when he was a baby, so that was 1997. I always heard people talk about how great the METCO system was, and they said sign him up very early. So I did sign him up once he was born, but he didn't get called until the 9th grade.
For some families, they are very committed to the METCO process and to what they believe the opportunity that the METCO program can offer to their child.
Parents are really committed to trying to get opportunities for their children for the METCO program. So it is no myth that people literally have children and are signing up within a week, because I was signed up and I didn't even have a first name at that point.
Most of our children in the program, and we try to keep it below half, are alumni's children. They want their kids in METCO.
And this waiting list will likely get longer as the criteria for evaluating potential students is evolving. With the appointment of Millie Arbaje Thomas in February of 2018, the new chief executive officer hopes that she can take METCO to the next level.
Our wait list right now is about 8,000 people waiting on our wait list. And we expect that to grow significantly because when there's new leadership, there's also new ways of marketing, new approaches to build different relationships and partnerships with the community. And I plan to go to those different parts of town here in Boston that represent a wide variety of Boston's urban community.
While the current statistics on race have not yet been released on the METCO program, in the past 5 years, METCO students were typically 73% African American, 19% Hispanic, 3% Asian, 4% mixed race, and about 1% of individuals identified as other. METCO began by servicing 7 school districts and 200 METCO students. Currently, there are 3,300 students participating in 38 school districts in metropolitan Boston and at 4 school districts surrounding Springfield. Not only has the program grown in Needham, as in surrounding areas, but attitudes towards the program have evolved as well.
This is a wonderful opportunity for our children to experience the diversity that exists in the world. Now, you can give lectures and read books about diversity, but it's much better if you actually experience it.
I think we want diversity. I think it also takes a lot of effort on our part to make it happen. I think it is really important for our kids to be in a diverse group of children, as well as the adults, families, everywhere you go.
Whenever you can have diversity of thought in your community, that's important. People bring, and one of the things that we really encourage our Boston resident families to do is bring who they are to the community. And getting different viewpoints, getting people's different perspectives on life is important in terms of a good education.
The benefit really flows both ways because Needham isn't the most diverse community naturally, so we add some diversity to the community. But we also, it's also diversity of experience. If you think about the fact that someone lives in the city, forget it for a moment whether they're black or Asian or Hispanic, but they live in the city. They grow up in a very different world. They get up early, they come to school, then they go back to another community, whereas we're in a suburban community. So that by itself adds some experiences.
When Boston resident students have the opportunity to integrate a school district seemingly devoid of color, it does bring up other issues. METCO students often find themselves in classes where they are the only students of color and are often integrated in school districts in which nearly a quarter are greater than 90% white, with only 5 less than 70% white.
METCO is a race-based program. The idea of the METCO program is to take students of color from Boston and bring them to surrounding districts that would otherwise more than likely not have as many students of color on their respective campuses.
I mean, Needham is just a part of this country. And so yes, we do have issues and we deal with them as they come. We are very fortunate here in Needham that we have a large, comparatively large METCO staff. So we're in the schools all the time. And have worked really hard to build relationships with principals and with teachers and guidance so that when these issues do happen, because they will happen, that we can approach them and we can deal with them in a real way.
The Needham community itself, which still is predominantly a white community, has even changed in a short amount of time. When I started as superintendent a little over 10 years ago, we were 90% white. Today, in 2017, we're 78% white, so that the percentage of students who are identified as other than white has increased significantly over the last 10 years. In addition to that, we have many more families and students who are speaking a language other than English joining our school community. And yet with change, certainly there's opportunity, and I see great opportunity, but there also is some discomfort, and sometimes there are things that happen. Whether you are a Needham resident student of color or you are a Boston resident student of color, there are sometimes some uncomfortable, unfortunate things that happen. So Needham is not immune to that.
While a large number of METCO students report having a positive experience, there are just as many students who report negative experiences, ranging from small microaggressions to even bigger direct infractions. Last spring, Needham Public Schools hired consultant Christine Robinson to do an equity audit that helped them learn more about their programs and practices in Needham Public Schools. Robinson reviewed more than 70 school documents and interviewed more than 50 school leaders, 50 middle school and high school students, and 115 parents to perform her equity audit of the Needham education system. According to her initial report, some students of color feel as though they do not belong and are not respected. There are disparities in post-secondary schooling options for them, and they have a significant lack of access to honors and AP curriculum options. The equity audit challenged the school system to think deeply about some of their procedures, educational programs, and opportunities in the Needham Public Schools.
In the event our folks who are listening to this conversation aren't sure about some of the specifics, these are some things that I'm disappointed that students had these experiences in the Needham schools. I just want to read some of the quotes that some of our students expressed as part of this, or their parents. When questioned, "You can't be a princess if you are brown. Brown is bad, ugly, scary, smelly, poor. Don't touch me if you are brown. Only people with yellow hair can be a princess. All Latinos are from Mexico. They can't speak English. Go work in a field." This is just some of some direct quotes that the few hundred students, staff, parents, and community members, as they talked about inequities and their experiences, shared. And they're pretty striking. They certainly touched a chord with me. I'm not naive. I know things go on. I'd like to think that in this community and after the work we've done that we have made some progress, but it's clear that there's more work that has to be done.
For sure.
people might not think that I'm like as smart as other kids, and so I've kind of always wanted to like prove myself and like get good grades and stuff to kind of show that or dispel that.
I remember this like it happened yesterday, but like 5th grade, some kid told me that my name sounded black, and that was horrible. I cried about that for so long. I hated my name for like 3 years straight. I told my mom I wanted to change my name. Like it was horrible, and to this day, I still remember it.
It puts like a wall up because it's like I can say something to her that I can't say to them, and it's like I'm trying every time I'm talking to them to like make sure I watch exactly what I say. So it's hard to make that like connection.
Feeling separated from the community is not just a Needham sentiment, however. It's something that is felt by METCO students across the Commonwealth. While METCO alumni boast about receiving a great education from the districts they attended, they are reminded that at times it came at a cost.
I recall, I think it was either my junior or senior year, and some of my METCO classmates was called by a Wellesley student, and I remember that the reaction from the METCO students was anger, and they retaliated against this person. I do recall that those students were punished, and the student from Wellesley was not. So that was pretty hurtful at the time.
I had experiences where people have called me out my name, like called me the N-word or, racial slurs, but...
In Needham?
In Needham.
In the schools?
In the schools.
What'd you do with that when someone called you a name?
Well, initially you get upset, you get mad, you tell your friends. I told teachers. Some teachers acted upon it. Some teachers, acted like it was just nothing. They didn't care. They didn't make any... punishment towards the student for calling me, the word.
I recall being called the N-word. I recall a few words being written on my locker in the early part of being a METCO student. I remember that.
So if I told you those things still happen to students today, how does that make you feel?
I would want to cry. I would hope that would not be the case, because that is tough. That is definitely it just wasn't a good experience.
Into Needham, a suburban town from Boston, so we can be together and that we can unify. But separating us by writing this word on the walls that's not helping it.
We cannot say the N-word. It doesn't matter if it's in a song or if your friends say it. It is not okay in any circumstance whatsoever.
Many of the problems that we deal with as METCO staff, with students of color, with white students in the district, have to do with race. Otherwise, I don't see that there would be much of a need for METCO staff.
METCO is basically a way to prepare kids for the real world. And the real world isn't all white and all black and all male or all female. It's everybody working together to make this world a better place when you leave it.
Things have happened to students, METCO students, Needham students, that involve race and that involve who one is or what they look like. I think what I'm proud of is that we're willing to say, wait a minute, let's pause, let's reflect on what happened, and how can we develop a plan to move forward so that this problem doesn't recur, and that we can all learn from it and grow from it.
While there are no easy and immediate answers, the Equity Report of Needham Public Schools revealed that there is much work to be done. And one of the groups ready to do this work is the newly formed REAL, or Race Equity Access Leadership Coalition, that has been created as a way to take on next steps. The group is trying to include staff, parents, and community involvement to look at areas such as hiring more diverse staff members, implementing a more culturally responsible curriculum, and actively working towards a more open school culture. It is also the hope of the Real Coalition that they can distribute the information to the greater community to keep the public informed and engaged.
We have some challenges that exist with racial equity in the Needham schools, and we need to address them head on and talk about them. I'm happy that the Race, Equity, Access, and Leadership Coalition, the Real Coalition, is formed. We'll be looking for membership from parents and students and other staff so that we can take this work beyond the schools and into the community so that we can have a real impact.
Parents obviously want to educate their kids and give them the best opportunity to do so. The METCO program did that for me. But in addition to that, I think it's also important for blacks, whites, whatever your ethnicity is, to be exposed to diversity. Boston is an extremely segregated city. At least it was when I lived in Boston. I assume it's still the same today. And because of that, programs like METCO not only benefit the students that are coming out of the inner city, I think it benefits the towns that are the host towns for the METCO students, not only for the kids of those suburban towns, but also for the parents.
While METCO was originally funded through a grant by the Carnegie Foundation and the United States Office of Education, today it is a grant program funded by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The grant is based upon prior year enrollment, and the amount awarded to METCO school districts is about $5,000 per pupil, a dollar amount that has been at risk for cuts each year.
Each student brings monies to the district with them. The district, does a lot in terms of welcoming students and making students feel a part of the community, but there are also dollars that come with that.
Sometimes I think families will say that to me, like, well, we don't need to put money towards Boston students, we need to support our own students. I'm like, there's not a cost in that way.
One of the things that is part of our responsibility as a school committee is dealing with the budget and having the budget approved. METCO has a separate budget. It has been cut in times, it has not been increased, and it's challenging because the METCO budget supports the transportation to and from the schools and support services and opportunities for the kids to work with people and help resolve issues for families. So the budget is very important, and one of the things that I certainly urge our Needham parents and our Boston parents and our legislators is that it's an important program, and it's not a huge piece. You can say that about almost everything in the state budget, but it is something that is valuable, and we want to be able to preserve that.
Every single year we have to go to the state legislature and fight for our state line item, and for all of these years it's been pretty much the only source of income for the program.
In fact, in 2015, the Senate Ways and Means Committee released its fiscal year 2016 budget, which reflected a $2 million reduction in the METCO funding. Senator Sonia Chang Diaz filed an amendment requesting METCO funding be increased.
Well, you can't get something for nothing, right? METCO does incredible work in bringing home really impressive results in terms of educational attainment, that results that exceed our statewide averages of educational attainment for kids in our K-12 education system across the state. And again, those returns that METCO yields with respect to racial integration and just having base staters that understand one another and have a little bit more sense of reality of what each other's worlds are like. It works. It does all of those things, but it doesn't. You can't get that for free, and you can't expect and ask families to give up so much in terms of personal sacrifice. The extra hours, the early mornings, the late evenings, the driving back and forth, the sacrifices that they make in terms of participating in activities in their home neighborhood. Those are all things that they give in to the common pot in order to make this mission work. And we can't ask that of families if we're not willing as a state to also contribute.
The fiscal year 2019 budget, released by the Massachusetts House on April 11, 2018, reflects an increase by $1.5 million in funding. This is about a 7% increase from fiscal year 2018. And while the increase is needed, some say it's not enough.
If we were really reflecting the value of the program, we would have grown the funding level, not just restored it back to what it was in previous years. And the fact that we have forgotten a little bit about METCO in recent years. You know, we have been really dogged in the legislature about increasing K-12 education funding, not as much as I believe we should have in total, but actually we've still been giving it increases year over year, but we haven't increased METCO funding at an equivalent rate.
The harsh reality is that today, METCO is still answering a question proposed by Boston parents more than 50 years ago. A shortage of desirable schools across the city of Boston and a lack of diversity in the suburbs has collided into the need for a program that today is the oldest integration program of its kind.
I would hope that at one day there would be no need for a METCO, that people would live out here, that the city schools would be what's desirable, that people could get a good education down the street from their house. Right now that's not the case, and if you really look, you have to look far down the road to see that may ever happen. But I think METCO, given the fact that all those things are not in place, I think METCO gives kids an opportunity that they would never get.
I want our students to leave Needham High School after a pre-K through 12 experience where they feel that they've learned about different people, they've learned deeply about themselves, and they now believe that they can impact the world in a very positive way.
And those are the ambassadors who will make America what it can be.
METCO is a key part of making that happen in Needham.
So, what will METCO look like tomorrow? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.